We start learning how to graph linear equations with the slope-intercept method. And the first thing that I need to tell you is what slope-intercept form is. If we talk about slope, the slope-intercept form of a linear equation, remember, this is for a linear equation, which we have been working with. In the last section, we graphed them using a table of values. We plugged in x's. Well, first we made sure it was solved for y. Plugged in an x, got a y. Well, now, slope-intercept form of a linear equation is y equals mx plus b. What I want you to notice is that it's solved for y. In the last section, didn't we solve equations for y? Okay, so you'll notice this is solved for y. That's why that last section was so important. Because if I get them solved for y, I can graph them real easily. What letter did we use for slope? M. So guess what? This, if I have it solved for y, then this letter in front of x is the slope. The number in front of x will be the slope of the linear equation. And this number out here, whether it's positive or negative, is the y-intercept of the graph. In other words, the place where it crosses the y-axis. Okay? You might want to put that. Where it crosses the y-axis. But we will always call it the y-intercept. All right? So, tonight in homework, before we start talking about graphing, they might ask you, they might give you a linear equation and say, find the slope and y-intercept. All right? They may say, find the slope and y-intercept, and they'll give you a linear equation like y equals 2/3 x minus 4. Well, you'll like these because this is super easy. If we follow this right here, the slope-intercept form, what's the slope? 2/3. And we can just put m equals 2/3. That's the slope, that's the rise over run. What's the y-intercept? The y-intercept is -4. Pretty hard, isn't it? Yeah, real hard. So, let me give you one to do now. How about y equals -4x plus 5? And I'll pause the video. You try it on your own. Okay, here's the slope. The slope is -4. The y-intercept. Now, what letter did I use for y-intercept in the original one? Didn't I use B? Yeah. I'm just going to use B. The y-intercept is 5. But you have to remember what that stands for. Okay, that stands for the y-intercept.
That's all we have to do, though.
On that problem, that's all you have to do. In a minute, we're going to graph them. All right? They may also ask you to write a linear equation in slope intercept form and let's just say for the given info. Write a linear equation in slope-intercept form for the given info. This is also easy. Let's say that they just give you this. M equals 3/5, B equals -2. They're telling you the slope is 3/5 and the y-intercept is -2. So all you have to do is plug in to y equals mx plus b. That's all you got to do. Plug the numbers into where they're supposed to go. The slope goes in for m, the y-intercept goes in for b. So my equation is y equals 3/5 x minus 2. Easy enough? Right. Now, well, that's all we're doing on this part. What if they gave you this? Now, pay attention, because this is where sometimes people get confused. What if they said the slope was 0 and the y-intercept was 4? Well, plug it into your equation, just like we did before. Y equals mx plus b, but this time your slope is 0. So this is y equals 0x plus 4. But what's 0x? What's 0 times anything? 0. So this equation is just y equals 4. Remember me telling you if it's just y equals a number, it's a horizontal line? Okay, so if the slope is 0, it's a horizontal line. All right. Now, they could tell you this. The slope is undefined. And the x-intercept is 12. Now, if they tell you this, you can't write it in y equals mx plus b form. You have to remember that if the slope is undefined, isn't it vertical? And if you remember, a vertical line is just x equals a number. Well, what do you think the number is? 12. X equals 12 is your equation. That one's done. Okay, easy. Why? Because this is a vertical line. Now, let's graph. You're going to be, I think, interested to see how easy these are to graph using slope-intercept. So your example is going to say, graph using slope-intercept. And I'll give you graph paper. And you don't have to spend a ton of time on your graphs and your notes, but you need to have a basic idea. Let's say that my first one I wanted to graph was y equals, let's do the one we looked at a minute ago, y equals 2/3 x minus 4. Now watch how easy this is. What's the y-intercept of that equation? -4. So watch how easy this is. The y-intercept is the place where it crosses the y-axis. Put a dot right there. So if you're making your graph, draw your coordinate grid, put your 4 marks, 2, 3, -4, and put a dot right on -4. Now, so we've taken care of this part. What's the slope? 2/3. The slope is 2/3. Do you remember that means rise over run? Doesn't slope also mean rise over run graphically? So look at how easy this is. You start at this y-intercept right here. If my slope is 2 over 3, then I'm going to go up 2 and over 3 and put my next point. Isn't that easy? Guess what? I can do it again because this graph goes on forever. I can go up 2 and over 3 again to get my next point. And I could go in the other direction. I could go down 2 and over 3 this way to that point. And guess what? I've now got a graph. Just connect the dots. Isn't that easy? Okay, let's do another one. All right, let's do another one. And let's change it up a little bit. You're going to see several different situations that I'd like to cover with you. Let's say that my equation was y equals negative 3x plus 2. Now, we start the same way. What's the y-intercept? 2. So I start on the y-axis at 2 and put a dot. Easy enough. What's the slope? The slope is negative 3. But if you remember, didn't I say we always like to write our slopes as a fraction? Now you're finding out why. How can I write negative 3 as a fraction? Negative 3 over 1. That's very important. So if you have a whole number, you have to write it over 1. So my rise and run is 3 over 1. But isn't this one negative? Right? So from this point that we started with, I'm going to go down 3 first and over 1. Because it's a negative slope. And I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3, and over 1 again to my next point. Right? Yep. And I'm going to go up 3 and over 1 this way. And then I connect the dots. So the main thing that you need to get from this problem is the fact that when the slope is a whole number, you have to put it over 1. And you also have to remember that if the slope is negative, it should be sloping down from left to right. All right? Let me give you one to do now on your own. Try this one on your own. We'll call this one number 3. Y equals 2x minus 5. I'll pause the video, try that one on your own. All right, let's see how you did. I'm just going to do this one by hand. My y-intercept is negative 5, so I'd come down to negative 5, put a dot. My slope is 2 over 1, so I'm going to go up 2 and over 1 to get my next point. And I'll go up 2 and over 1 to get my next point. And I could come down 2 and over 1 to get a point this way. Your graph should have looked like that. Now, one thing that you sometimes need to be aware of, what if you got a problem like this? Y equals negative 6x. What's the y-intercept? No, it's not a vertical line. There's an x there. Y equals negative 6x. There's a slope there. What's the y-intercept, though? 0. If you see one like this, the y-intercept is 0. So you would start, let me just put this one up real quick. You would start at 0 and then do your slope, right? So the slope is negative 6 over 1. You would come down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 over 1. Your graph would look like that. It would go through the origin. We call that the origin, where the two axes intersect. Okay? One last thing before we finish up. What if they gave you this one and said graph that using slope-intercept?
Solve for y first.
I need to solve for y first. That's one of the reasons why we did that in that last section. Because if I solve this for y, it's easy. Wouldn't I subtract 3x? Now let's write this in slope-intercept form. Y equals negative 3x plus 7. We want to write it in slope-intercept form so we know what our slope is, what our y-intercept is. All right? So my y-intercept is 7. So I would start at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that's where I would put my first dot. That's the y-intercept. The slope is negative 3 over 1. That's my slope. So I'm going to come down 1, 2, 3 over 1. Put a dot. Okay, I could come down 3 over 1 again, put a dot. Okay, and we will stop there for today.